we were talking at your house the other day about um, um, how John Reid came up the river, okay, on the Underground Railroad, right?
Right.
And how Park Church was a part of that, and how he stayed at the stable and stuff like that.
Right.
That's what we.
That's what you want?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's.
John Reid came to Elmira through the Underground Railroad. He was an escaped slave from someplace in Virginia. We don't know exactly where. And he came through the Underground Railroad and made it as far as Elmira, where he came into Park Church, which was one of the Underground Railroad stations. But the people that came into that particular place weren't kept there because some of them were being followed, and they figured that if they were caught there, that they would all be taken back south. So they were dispersed after they arrived in Elmira to different places, different homes in the area of members of the Underground Railroad. So John was taken to a livery stable that was owned by a Mr. Reid. And it was at the foot of Church Street, across Newtown Creek, on Old Route 17. And it was a livery stable where the horses were changed on the stage route from Auburn through Elmira on going south. So Mr. Reid hid John in his hayloft. And of course they were always on the lookout for people following the slaves, because they knew that some of the masters were fathers of some of these slaves. As it happened, John Reid, master, was also his father, his mother being one of the slaves. The slaveholder's name was Muldoon, and sure enough, he followed his slave son to Elmira with his overseer, and they hung around the area for about 3 days. And when they couldn't find him, they finally left. And the hayloft where he was hiding, Mr. Reid got him down, had him come down from the hayloft. And he asked him if he wanted to stay in the area, and he said no. He said, my aim was Canada. He said, because that's where we knew if we ever got to Canada, we really would be free. Mm-hmm. And he said, I'd rather not stay in Elmira. But he said, well, you'll have to wait, for a few days, because you have to wait for a group that would be going to Canada. You can't go alone. And so he said, all right. So in the meantime, he started taking care of the horses for Mr. Reid. And Mr. Reid noticed how good he was with the animals. And he said, John, don't you want to stay? He said, if you stay and take care of my horses, he said, I'll let you use my name so that you won't have to use the name Muldoon. And so John thought it over, and he said, well, I guess that might be a good idea. I guess I will stay. So that's how the name was changed from the master's Muldoon name to the name Reid. You'll probably find a discrepancy in the historical society of the spellings, because I understand that the Reid livery stable was spelled R-E-E-D, and why Mr. Reid had it spelled R-E-I-D, I don't know. Mm-hmm. But anyhow, so John stayed, and he later met a young lady who was a freed slave from Maryland. And her name was Betsy Lingue, Lingue. And she had come to the area. I don't really know whether she came looking for work or somebody brought her to this area with them to work for them. But she was freed. She had manumission papers. She had manumission papers, which the family still possess. She met John. She and John were married. And
where was she from, Aunt Jennie?
she was from Maryland. I don't know the exact place in Maryland. On the manumission papers, I don't know.
It says Baltimore County.
Baltimore County. So I don't know exactly where in Baltimore County she would have been from. But we can maybe later search that out, because we have the page number and everything from the book where it's recorded at the courthouse in Maryland County. So we can probably look that up, which would be interesting to find out exactly. Bampa had done some research and found out that John Reid's mother had come as a slave through New Orleans, because apparently the boat or the ship that she was brought over, or her parents were brought over from Africa, docked in New Orleans. And then the buyers used to go into New Orleans to buy these slaves, and then they would take them back to their plantations in different areas of the South. And apparently Mr. Muldoon or his overseer or somebody connected went into New Orleans and bought some of his slaves from this ship. So John's mother or grandparents apparently came over. That's how they came over, to this country. So that was what my father found out. He didn't record it, and I'm so sorry that he didn't. We were told about it.
But that's someplace for us to look for some more information.
Right.
If we want to pursue it.
So we might, I don't know whether there's going to be any discrepancy because I was told that it was John's parents. Now, we might find that it was one of the other grandparents, But anyway, it was way back when ships were being brought into, with the slaves. About Betsy, who changed her name to Elizabeth Lingu Reid. After John died, she remarried, and she married a man that everybody in Elmira called Daddy Wynn. Now, I have no idea what Daddy Wynn's first name was, but maybe I can search through some of the records at the library, some of the census records at the library, and find out. So she later married him. And then she died in on October 22nd, 1896 in Elmira, New York. And her place of birth was listed on the death record as Maryland. And as of being married, her occupation was, of course, housekeeper. And at the time of her death, she lived at 720 Baldwin Street, Elmira, New York. Her father's name was listed as Daniel Lingue, Lingue, his birthplace, Maryland. Maiden name of her mother, Rebecca. So we're getting back to why Rebecca was in the 1860 census, listed at 50 years old. Rebecca was her mother, and apparently she had gone back to Maryland and gotten her mother and brought her here. Daniel Lingu was the slave owner. He wasn't white.
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
he was white, but I don't know whether he was her father or not.
Oh, they just listed him as the father. Okay. He was
Yeah,
the slave owner.
yeah, they listed him as the father because I don't know why they listed him as the father. It's possible that he was the father, but I don't know this for certain. So I'm just going to leave it like it is on this death record because I don't know that for certain.
Now, Betsy and John, okay,
John
had your father,
had my grandfather,
your grandfather.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit about
James B. Reid.
And
Well,
the B is for?
I cannot remember what the B is for, but I am going to look into that further when my sister comes home. Maybe she can remember, or she might have something, with it on. James B., who was Betsy and John's Reid's son, married Sarah Jane Tolson, who was born in Upper Marlboro, Maryland. And Sarah Jane Tolson was the daughter of Thomas Tolson and Rachel Tolson. And she was born December 26, 1860. She came to Elmira on August the 3rd, 1883. She had apparently had a child in Maryland before she came to Elmira, and his name also was James. But when she came to Elmira, she had named him James Tolson. But when she came to Elmira, she decided that she was going to give him Mr. Reid's name. So this was done. Now, I don't know whether it was done legally back that far or not. But anyway, he's listed in the Bible as James E. Reid. And he was born January the 8th, 1882. And James Reid, I understand, died when he was young. But I often remember my father telling the story of when he was born, when my father was born. John was that much older than he was, that he used to carry my father up and down the street and show him off to all the neighbors as his new baby brother. But exactly when he died, I don't have any idea when James E. Reid died. But he would be my father's half brother. So we get to James B. Reid. You want to go back to James B. Reid, my grandfather. He was quite a prominent person in Elmira. Him and my grandmother, Sarah Jane, were considered quite the caterers around Elmira. They used to cater weddings and anniversaries and parties and whatever for people. And he had a habit of having possum dinners. And he was quite well known for that. I guess he really knew how to cook them. Anyhow, he had quite a reputation for his possum dinners, and many write-ups in the Elmira Star-Gazette concerning them.
Yeah, they're all here.
Yeah.
I was just reading through them.
Yeah. So he was also a courier for the old Second National Bank, which was located on Lake Street, where the present Marine Midland Bank is located. No.
Okay.
But he was a bank messenger for the old Second National Bank, and he was quite well known because he was right there in the front of the bank every morning when you walked in to do your banking. Mr. Reid opened the door for you, and every night he closed and locked the door. But him and my grandmother, Sarah Jane, were members of the Frederick Douglass Memorial Amy Zion Church. And they, when the church windows were put in, up at the old church that was torn down to make way for Jones's Court, the stained glass windows, one of the windows has Sarah Jane Reid's name on it because she and her husband bought that particular window for the church. And that's what people used to do back in those days. You know, the different members, if they were able, you know. And then sometimes maybe 4 or 5 got together and bought a window, and they each had their name, you know, on that window. And then also he was Mason. My grandfather was a member of the Colored, Free, and Accepted Masons of Ancient Free and Accepted Masons of Mount Nebo Lodge number 41. And there's an insert in the scrapbook, and it says the Colored, Free, and Accepted Masons of Mount Nebo Lodge number 41 will celebrate their first anniversary Thursday, May the 3rd at Bundy Hall. Now, Bundy Hall was on Dickinson Street, and that was the place where the colored congregated for their Saturday evening dances. Mm-hmm. Because even back then they didn't go to the white halls. Mm-hmm. They had their own halls. Mm-hmm. My grandfather, James B. Reid, was married. His first wife's name was Mary Stewart. And he and Mary had 2 daughters, Nettie and Georgia Reid. And when Mary Stewart died, that was when he married my grandmother, Sarah Jane Tolson. And they had my father, John Thomas Reid, who, after he went to school, decided that he did not like his name to be John Thomas, so he turned it around, and he called himself Thomas John. After graduating from high school, he wanted to go to college, so he went down to Howard University, but apparently he didn't like it down there. We don't know exactly what happened because he would never give out the information. But he did not stay a full year down there. And he came home. And he joined the Navy because World War I was going on then. He went in the Navy. Now that might have been what pulled him out of college. I don't know, for sure. But maybe some of his friends, were all going, and leaving him. He's in college, and they're going over there, big deal, fighting, I don't know, because I wish now that I had...
Fighting the Kaiser.
Yeah, I wish now that I had asked him, some more questions about it. Of course, he just never gave it out, willingly. But anyway, yeah, he was in the engineering gang aboard the USS Leviathan. And the USS Leviathan had been captured from the Germans, and the name had been changed from the Vaterland to the USS Leviathan.
Right.
So on his last trip home, with the last bunch of soldiers returning after the war was over, he noticed that there was a soldier on the ship, was on the deck, and he was kind of all bundled up, and he looked like he was going to die any minute. And my father kept looking at the man, and he thought, gosh, he looks awful familiar to me. So finally he got up the courage and walked over and started talking to him. Sure enough, he was Mr. Flanagan from Elmira. So my father took care of Mr. Flanagan all the way from Brest, France, back to New York City, and saw to it that, he had food and water, and that he was kept warm and whatever.
They used to pack people aboard troop ships like cattle.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And he took care of him. When they landed in New York, he sent a telegram to the Flanagan family here in Elmira that he would stay with him until they could get there to New York. And they got right on the train and went to New York and got Mr. Flanagan, brought him back to Elmira. And he, after that, the Flanagan family couldn't do enough for the Reid family. As children, we had clothes and everything of that nature. Not a lot, but they would always remember, different times of the year. And because they own one of the biggest department stores in Elmira. Flanagan. Yeah.
Remember...
How do you get the nickname Chick?
You got me.
I know.
Tell us all.
Tell it.
All I knew was Chick and Pop.
When he was...
It better be Pop and not Chick.
That's right. We didn't call him Chick. Everybody else called him Chick, but we didn't call him Chick. My mother didn't call him Chick either.
TJ.
TJ.
Yeah, I remember
that. When he was born, he had rickets. And rickets, is a bone disease where your legs look like an S. So back in those days, they used to put braces on their legs to kind of straighten the legs up. So he hated those braces, and he'd go out to play with the kids, and of course he couldn't run up and down 2nd Street with the kids because he had the braces on. He used to have to sit on the porch and watch the rest of the kids play. So finally he got the idea, found out how he could take them braces off. So he'd get out of the braces and he'd go play with the kids. Well, of course his legs was like this, so he looked like a chicken. So the kids used to call him Chicken. Thomas John Reid married Viola Florence Elsha, who was half Mohawk and half Oneida Indian. Her father was the Mohawk, and her mother was the Oneida. Her father's name was Hubert Herbert Elsha, and her mother's name was Ida Harris before she married Mr. Elsha. And they, I believe they met on the, on the Onondaga Reservation up near Syracuse, but I'm not positive about that. Anyway, they lived for a while in a place called Collinsville, Connecticut, which is a suburb of Hartford, Connecticut. And that's where my mother was born. Her brother Wilbur was born, and her 2 twin sisters were born. And when she was 6 years old, and I believe her brother was quite a bit older than she was. He was probably around 10 or 12 years old. But when she was 6, the father, my grandfather, Hubert Herbert Elsha, decided to take the family back back to the Onondaga Reservation because he felt that probably they could get along better there. Apparently work must have ran out in the area or something, that whatever he was able to do. So back in those days, you got from place to place the best way you could. So he had 2 oxen and an ox cart. So he loaded his family possessions and his younger children on the ox cart, and him and his wife and his oldest son drove the ox cart from Collinsville, Connecticut, down the Mohawk Trail to the Onondaga Reservation. Well, apparently they stayed there for a little while, but then he apparently heard of work in Auburn, New York. And he went to Auburn, moved his family there, and got a job in a little factory. He contracted what they call grinder's consumption back in those days, which really was a tuberculosis, but it was caused from the grindings, from the steel getting in his lungs. So by this time, of course, a few years had passed, and by this time, him and my grandmother had 10 children. So when he died, she was left with these children. And of course, back in those days, there was nothing like relief and nothing like, retirement or pensions or anything. So she did the best she could. She took in washings, and I remember her telling me that she used to do a washing and an ironing for 25 cents. And how many of those she had to do a day, I don't know, to feed 10 kids. But anyway, it finally got pretty hard for her. So there was an orphan's home in Auburn, and they would take children into this home so that they wouldn't be destitute and hungry and not cared for. So she did the best thing for her. Rather than see her children starve, she put the ones that they would accept into this home. And there were certain age limits. The babies, they wouldn't take because they had no facilities for taking care of small children. Back in those days, they didn't take babies. If the babies wore diapers, that was out. And if you were older, you didn't go. But my mother at the time, I think she was something like, I don't know, I can't remember now. I think she was 9 years old. So she had 2 twin sisters. And she and the 2 twins were put in this orphan's home. And so they, both of the twins died while they were in the home. And then she stayed there until she was 18. You could stay there until you were 18 years old, and then they kind of got rid of you. They didn't want you there any longer. I guess they figured that you could get out in the world and make your own living. So anyway, but they had a way of doing it. The farmers in the area, the big farmers in the area, used to come to this orphan's home, and they would pick out the ones that they wanted to come and work with them on their farm. And they would give them a home. But they had to, work for their board and keep board and keep. So she was picked to go out with a family named Corey. And so she went out on this farm at 18 to work. And the farm was at a place called Kings Ferry, New York, which is between Lansing and Auburn, New York. And she stayed there until she was 29 years old. And they were really good to her. She wanted to go to church, and they used to go into Auburn. Wasn't too far from Kings Ferry, so they used to go into Auburn for their church. And so they would take her when they went, and they would leave her out at the colored church, which was a Methodist, the colored Methodist church in Auburn. And that way she would meet different people. So she met a man and his wife. And they became good friends. And she went and she used to come, like, if she could get a day off, she would come into Auburn and stay at their house overnight. And if there was something going on at the church or whatever, they would take her to it along with them. And she, that way she met, quite a few different people. There was also a man and his wife that used to come from Elmira to Kings Ferry. And his name was Joe Thompson. His wife's name was Eva Thompson. And Mr. Thompson had been an orphan, and he had been raised on a farm the same way as my mother had been raised out there. But after he got older, he had married, and came to Elmira. But he used to go back to this farm to visit these people that, that had kind of took him in, and of course he had to work for his board and keep. But anyway, my mother met him and his wife. So they said to her, why don't you come to Elmira sometime and go to our church? So she thought, well, that'd be a good idea. So she did this. She came to Elmira and she went to church with them. And at the time, Reverend Ellison was the minister of the Frederick Douglass Memorial AME Zion Church. Reverend Ellison was Mrs. Rosabelle Coleman's father. And his grandsons are Howard Coleman, Winston Coleman, and Rollie Coleman. Mm-hmm. So my mother, after she met the Allison family, and she was talking about, she was kind of getting a little tired of the farm life, and it was, she wanted to do something different. But she was a good seamstress. One of the women at the farm had taught her how to sew, and she really could really sew very well. So I guess Mrs. Ellison said, well, why don't you come to Elmira? She said, people here in Elmira, the wealthy people here in Elmira, have seamstress come into their homes, and if in the summertime, and make clothes for the whole family, and in the wintertime, they make the winter clothes for the whole family. But if you want to do that, we have two daughters, Quincy and Rosabelle. And we'd love to have you stay with us. We have an extra room, and you could stay here with us. So my mother decided that she would do that. So she came to Elmira. Now, one of the daughters, Quincy, was seeing Thomas John Reid. That was one of her friends. So she just knew that Thomas John Reid was going to eventually, that they were going to get married. And I guess Thomas John Reid took one look at Viola Florence Elsha, and so therefore they got married. So that's how my mother and my father met. It's kind of a cute little story.